The baby monitor sat on the nightstand, its tiny green light blinking in steady intervals. I barely noticed it anymore, just another piece of technology blending into the chaos of new parenthood. Most nights, it buzzed with soft static or picked up the occasional creak of the crib as Emma shifted in her sleep. But tonight felt off. It was almost midnight when I first noticed it. I had just climbed into bed, exhausted from the day, but unable to fully relax. The monitor crackled to life, faint and uneven. At first, I thought it was just interference. The house was old, and the wiring wasn't great. The monitor often picked up odd noises, garage door openers, stray radio signals. But this time, it wasn't just noise. Through the static, there were whispers. I froze, my hand halfway to the lamp switch. The whispers were faint, but I could make out the rhythm of words. Someone was speaking, repeating the same phrase over and over. Bring her back. I stared at the monitor, waiting for the static to clear. My pulse thudded in my ears. I leaned in closer, hoping I'd misheard. The screen displayed a grainy, black and white image of Emma's crib. She was there, tiny and peaceful, curled up under her blanket. But the whispers didn't stop. Bring her back. My first thought was that someone nearby was using the same frequency. Baby monitors weren't exactly secure, and I'd heard stories about signals crossing. It had to be that, right? But the voice, it wasn't normal. It wasn't just words. There was a strange quality to it, a distortion, like it was being dragged through the static. The longer I listened, the harder it became to convince myself it was just a technical glitch. I turned to my husband, Chris, who was snoring softly beside me. I shook his shoulder. Chris, wake up, I whispered, my voice trembling. He stirred, groaning. What is it? Listen. I held the monitor up so he could hear. He squinted at it, still half asleep. It's just interference, he mumbled, rolling over. It's not, I insisted, my voice sharper now. Listen to what it's saying. He sighed and sat up, rubbing his eyes. I pressed the monitor closer to him. The whispers continued, soft but insistent. Bring her back. Chris frowned, now fully awake. That's weird, he admitted. He took the monitor from me, staring at the screen. Emma hadn't moved. Maybe it's a neighbor's signal, he said, though he didn't sound convinced. It's on a closed frequency, I said. It shouldn't be picking anything up. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he fiddled with the monitor, adjusting the volume and flipping through the settings. The whispers persisted, unchanging. Bring her back. A chill ran down my spine. What does that even mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Chris shook his head. I don't know. He set the monitor down and stood up. I'm going to check on her. No, I blurted out, grabbing his arm. What? I didn't know how to explain the unease curling in my chest. I don't know. Something feels wrong. She's fine, he said, his tone gentle but firm. Look. He pointed to the monitor. Emma was still there, still sleeping. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Chris pulled his arm free and headed toward the nursery. I followed close behind, the cold hardwood floor biting at my feet. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the old pipes. When we reached Emma's room, Chris pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking in protest. She was there, just as the monitor had shown, tucked snugly into her crib. Her chest rose and fell with each tiny breath. Chris turned to me, raising an eyebrow. See? She's fine. But as he said it, the whispers grew louder. They weren't coming from the monitor anymore. They were coming from the room. I froze, my eyes darting around the nursery. The air felt heavier, like the room was holding its breath. The shadows in the corners seemed darker, deeper. Chris didn't seem to notice. He stepped closer to the crib, brushing a hand over Emma's soft hair. Do you hear that? I whispered, barely able to get the words out. Hear what? Bring her back. The voice was louder now, more insistent. It felt like it was coming from everywhere at once, above us, behind us, inside us. Chris turned to me, his face pale. Okay, that's not normal. Before I could respond, the baby monitor crackled again. This time, the screen went black. We both stared at it, waiting for it to come back on. When it did, the image on the screen wasn't Emma's crib anymore. It was us. We froze, staring at the monitor. The grainy black and white screen showed us standing in the nursery. I could see Chris with his hand still resting on the edge of Emma's crib and me, wide-eyed, gripping the doorframe. The angle didn't make sense. That's not possible, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Chris didn't respond. His eyes were glued to the screen, his hand slowly pulling away from the crib as if it had burned him. Where's the camera? I asked, my voice shaking. Chris turned, scanning the room. The baby monitor's camera was mounted on the wall, aimed directly at Emma's crib. It hadn't moved. It couldn't have moved. Maybe it's a glitch, Chris said, though he didn't sound convinced. A glitch doesn't show us like this, I snapped. My chest was tight, and my breaths came shallow and quick. The screen flickered, and for a moment, it went black again. When the image returned, Emma wasn't in the crib. My stomach dropped. I lunged forward, reaching for her, but she was still there, sleeping peacefully, exactly where she should be. I turned back to the monitor. The screen still showed her empty crib. The whispering was gone, replaced by a faint hum that felt almost alive. Chris grabbed my arm. Let's go back to our room. Maybe it's the monitor itself, not the camera. I wanted to argue, but the weight in the air felt suffocating. The nursery, once a place of comfort and warmth, now felt foreign and wrong. I wanted to argue, but the weight in the air felt suffocating. The nursery, once a place of comfort and warmth, now felt foreign and wrong. We backed out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. Chris grabbed the monitor off the nightstand when we returned to our bedroom. He sat on the bed, flipping through the settings again. Anything? I asked, standing in the doorway. No, he said. His voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Everything looks normal. It's not normal, I muttered. I sat down beside him, staring at the screen. The image was back to Emma's crib, she was there again, her tiny form rising and falling with each breath. But something about the picture felt wrong. It took me a moment to realize what it was. There's no static, I said. Chris frowned. What? There's always static, I said. Even when she's sleeping, there's a faint sound, breathing, the creak of the crib, something. But now it's just silent. Chris leaned closer to the screen, as if he could force it to make sense. The silence from the monitor felt louder than the whispers had been. Suddenly, the screen flickered again. This time, the image warped. The edges of the crib stretched and twisted, and Emma's tiny form seemed to flicker in and out of focus. I grabbed Chris's arm. Turn it off, I said. He hesitated. Chris, turn it off. He fumbled with the buttons, but the monitor wouldn't respond. The screen flickered more violently, the static returning in sharp bursts. And then the whispers came back. Bring her back. This time, the voice was louder. Clearer. It was still distorted, still unnatural, but now it sounded like it was coming from inside the room.
Bring her back. Chris dropped the monitor like it was on fire. It hit the floor with a dull thud, but the screen stayed on, the image twisting and flickering. What does it mean? I asked, my voice trembling. Chris didn't answer. He knelt down, picking up the monitor with shaking hands. The whispers had stopped again, but the screen was still flickering. And then, for the first time, we heard a different voice.
Where is she? The voice was deep and slow, each word dragging like it was being pulled through mud. It wasn't coming from the monitor. It was coming from the hallway. Chris shot to his feet, his eyes wide. Did you hear that? I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. The air in the room felt heavier, colder. I could see my breath fogging in front of me. Where is she? The voice asked again, closer this time. I grabbed Chris's arm, my nails digging into his skin. What's happening? He didn't answer. Instead, he moved toward the door, peeking out into the hallway. It was empty. But the voice didn't stop. Where is she? Chris shut the door and locked it, his chest heaving. We need to call someone, he said. Who? I asked, my voice breaking. What do we even say? Hi, there's a voice in our house asking creepy questions through a baby monitor? He didn't respond. I backed away from the door, my eyes darting around the room. The walls seemed closer than they had before, the shadows darker. Bring her back. The voice was back on the monitor now, louder than ever. And then Emma cried. It was a sharp, piercing wail that cut through the whispers like a knife. Without thinking, I ran to the nursery. I backed away from the door, my eyes darting around the room. The walls seemed closer than they had before, the shadows darker. Bring her back. The voice was back on the monitor now, louder than ever. And then Emma cried. It was a sharp, piercing wail that cut through the whispers like a knife. Without thinking, I ran to the nursery.
Chris shouted behind me, but I didn't stop. When I reached the room, the air felt even colder. Emma was still in her crib, her tiny fists clenched, her face red and wet with tears. But I wasn't alone. Something stood in the corner, barely visible in the shadows. The thing in the corner didn't move. At first, I thought maybe it was just a trick of the shadows, my mind playing games in the dim light. But as I stood frozen by the crib, I saw it shift ever so slightly. It wasn't human. Its outline was wrong, the angles too sharp, the proportions too tall. Emma's cries filled the room, piercing and frantic. I wanted to pick her up, to comfort her, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the thing in the corner.
Chris. I shouted, my voice cracking. Footsteps thundered down the hall. Chris burst into the room, skidding to a stop when he saw the look on my face. What is it? He asked, breathless. I pointed to the corner, unable to speak. Chris followed my gaze, squinting into the shadows. At first, he didn't seem to see it. Then his whole body tensed, and he took a step back, pulling me with him. What the hell is that? He whispered. The figure leaned forward, just enough for the dim light from the nightlight to catch its face, or what should have been a face. There were no eyes, no mouth, no features at all. Just a blank, pale surface that seemed to pulse faintly, like it was alive. Emma's cries grew louder, more desperate. I reached for her, finally breaking free of my paralysis, and scooped her up into my arms. Her tiny body trembled against me, and I could feel my own heart hammering in my chest. Chris moved in front of us, positioning himself between me and the thing in the corner. What do you want? He asked, his voice shaking but firm. The figure didn't respond. Instead, the baby monitor on the nightstand crackled to life. Bring her back, the voice said again, distorted and hollow. Chris turned toward the monitor, then back to the figure. Who are you talking about? Bring who back? The figure tilted its head, like it was trying to understand him. I held Emma tighter, her cries slowing to soft whimpers. The room felt colder now, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones. I could see my breath in the air, each exhale shaky and uneven. The figure moved then, its body shifting in a jerky, unnatural way, like it wasn't used to moving. It stepped out of the corner, and I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the edge of the rug. Chris, I whispered, panic clawing at my throat. I see it, he said, his voice low. The figure raised a hand, or what looked like a hand. Its fingers were too long, too thin, and they ended in sharp, pointed tips. It gestured toward Emma, and I instinctively pulled her closer. No, I said, my voice trembling. The figure stopped, its head tilting again. The monitor crackled once more. Where is she? The deep voice asked, slow and deliberate. She's right here. Chris shouted, his frustration boiling over. Emma's here. What do you want from us? The figure didn't react. It just stood there, silent and still. Then, without warning, it took another step forward. Get back. Chris shouted, grabbing the lamp from the nightstand and holding it like a weapon. The figure stopped, its featureless face turning toward him. For a moment, I thought it might leave, but then the monitor crackled again, louder this time. She doesn't belong to you. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My knees went weak, and I clutched Emma even tighter. She started crying again, her tiny fists flailing. What does that mean? I demanded, my voice breaking. She's our daughter. Of course, she belongs to us. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised its other hand, pointing at the monitor. Bring her back, the voice said again, distorted and hollow. Chris turned toward the monitor, then back to the figure. Who are you talking about? Bring who back? The figure tilted its head, like it was trying to understand him. I held Emma tighter, her cries slowing to soft whimpers. The room felt colder now, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones. I could see my breath in the air, each exhale shaky and uneven. The figure stopped, its head tilting again. The monitor crackled once more. Where is she? The deep voice asked, slow and deliberate. She's right here. Chris shouted, his frustration boiling over. Emma's here. What do you want from us? The figure didn't react. It just stood there, silent and still. Then, without warning, it took another step forward. Get back. Chris shouted, grabbing the lamp from the nightstand and holding it like a weapon. The figure stopped, its featureless face turning toward him. For a moment, I thought it might leave, but then the monitor crackled again, louder this time. She doesn't belong to you. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My knees went weak, and I clutched Emma even tighter. She started crying again, her tiny fists flailing. What does that mean? I demanded, my voice breaking. She's our daughter. Of course, she belongs to us. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised its other hand, pointing at the monitor. The screen flickered, and the image changed. It was no longer showing Emma's crib. Instead, it showed a room I didn't recognize. The walls were dark, the floor bare. In the center of the room was a crib, but it wasn't Emma's crib. It was older, the wood worn and splintered. And inside the crib was a baby. My breath caught in my throat. The baby wasn't Emma, but it looked like her, just slightly off. Her hair was darker, her cheeks fuller, but the resemblance was uncanny. What the hell is this? Chris whispered, his grip on the lamp tightening. The figure pointed at the monitor again. Bring her back, the voice repeated, louder now. Thank you for watching and subscribe if you want to see part 2 of the story.